That's uncanny. I completely relate to that marathon runner who ran the marathon at the Olympics with a broken leg. That is absolutely spooky. I trod on a cocktail stick on Sunday night, and I've still got a really painful heel. I've still got a very sore heel. I wouldn't be fair to give you the grisly details of how far into my heel the cocktail stick actually travelled. It had fallen out of my martini glass. I've got so much in common with that Olympic athlete. It's practically psychic territory. So, I mean, I probably you don't fully appreciate how hard it is to run a marathon with a broken leg. But having trodden on a cocktail stick that fell out of my martini glass on Sunday evening, I feel like we're almost spiritually aligned. So, congratulations and commiserations. I said to you yesterday, you can sometimes tell when we're about to approach a subject that I don't really want to talk about, because I'll go off at a bit of a tangent at 10 o'clock instead of diving straight into the subject matter. That's not actually the case today. I don't particularly want to talk about this. I wish I lived in a world where I didn't have to. But it occurred to me on the way into work this morning that our eyes have been dragged from warfare in both Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Gaza. And there are reasons for that. Sometimes, I'm afraid, fatigue plays a part. But our attention has been dragged back to both theatres in the last 24, 48 hours. And we will be catching up with what the latest developments in Russia mean in the course of this programme. But the first hour is going to be dedicated to a combination of stories that not only beg a belief, but also, I think, lead inexorably to the conclusion that the modern state of Israel is now operating with complete impunity and barbarity on a scale that I cannot quite credit. So, trigger warnings galore this morning. The details of what protesters in Israel are seeking to defend will... I don't know what figure of speech to use, because any traditional figure of speech or cliche is going to trivialize the issue. I'll get onto that shortly, but I'm warning you now. It's about as discussed. It's not only the details of the story at the heart of the protest that are disgusting, but when I tell you what the protesters are actually doing or saying, you're not going to believe me. Bob tells me this is called creative avoidance. I like that phrase. That's the process that I suffer from sometimes when I know I should be talking about things, but I just feel that we've talked them to death, as it were. So I'm going to begin, speaking of death, with the tale of newborn twins, whose father, 4 days after their birth, went to the local government office to register their birth, deploying or utilising some of the infrastructure that remains operational in Gaza, despite the bombardment to which the region has now been exposed for months and months. This is in a region called Deir al-Bala. I can't do it. So 4 days old, Dad goes to the local government office to register their birth. He is on his way back, clutching the birth certificates, when his neighbours call to say that his home has been bombed. He gets home, still clutching the birth certificates, to discover that the strike has killed his wife, his twins, his newborn twins, and their grandmother. I don't know what happened, he said. I am told it was a shell that hit the house. The BBC has asked the Israeli army for comment on the strike, and at the time of writing, they were still waiting for a response. The health ministry in Gaza, which you are required, I think, to add, is run by Hamas, says 115 infants have been born and killed during the course of this war. Sometimes the stories cut through the creative avoidance, don't they? They cut through the fatigue. And this is one of them. Asa and Aisel, a boy and a girl, 4 days old. Father Mohammed goes to the local government office to register their birth, and while he's there, they're killed. The Sky News, I don't know if it's right to pick up on this stuff. That is a form of fatigue. But I found the headline that Sky News deployed on this troubling. 4-day-old twins killed in Gaza airstrike as father went to get birth certificates. Killed by who now? Killed by what now? Oh, an airstrike. 4-day-old twins killed by the Israeli Defense Force as father went to get birth certificates. So that story is unbearable, right? But believable. Tragically, horribly, totally believable. Almost perhaps to the point of being unshocking. You know, there are people in Benjamin Netanyahu's government who have made it clear that they don't believe there is any such thing as an innocent Palestinian. There are people in the UK media who've come perilously close to making that point publicly. So much so, in fact, that I am 100% certain that they are making that point privately. I also have to now draw your attention to another story, which is, I think, although nobody has died, in some ways it's even worse. And this is a story about a protest, continuing protests at, in Israel, where essentially protesters, politicians, and TV commentators are defending the right of soldiers to mistreat and even, and this is where the trigger warnings come in, rape Palestinian prisoners in detention. Now, I first saw this on the Al Jazeera channel, the Al Jazeera English channel, which is one of the outlets that still manages to have reporters on the ground in Gaza. Of course, that is not something that many British news organisations are able to do because Israel won't let them. And because Al Jazeera is Qatari owned and clearly has an editorial slant, I tread carefully. Whether I should or not, I don't know. But the report that I saw was absolutely clear because it includes footage from Israeli television. It includes footage of Israeli politicians. It includes the Twitter feeds of Israeli public figures. And the contention of these protesters grew from reports of IDF soldiers, army reservists, a leaked video, and this is the biggest trigger warning of all, a leaked video of Israeli soldiers torturing and raping a Palestinian prisoner in circumstances that I don't think I can legally share fully with you at 12 minutes after 10 on a regulated British radio station. I don't think I can give you the details. I can tell you that the video has been broadcast. I can tell you that the place where this torture took place was, and I'll probably mispronounce it, Stay-Taiman. It's two words, S-D-E, new word T-E-I-M-A-N. Thousands of detainees from the Gaza Strip were brought there after mass arrests by soldiers. This is from Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, over 100 years old, and they have reported that very slowly the full dimensions of the horror emerged. Stay-Taiman was a place where the most horrible torture we had ever seen was occurring. The testimonies from people serving at the facility or from inmates who had been released were frightening. This included inhumane conditions and abuse, including sexual abuse, sleep deprivation, the playing of extremely loud music for long stretches, and severe physical violence. It's not for nothing that Stay-Taiman has been called the Israeli Guantanamo. But it gets worse. The video of soldiers apparently raping a prisoner in this detention centre has prompted protests in defence of the soldiers. I'll say that again. In defence of the soldiers. Supporters of the Israeli government or elements of the Israeli government, up to and including Israeli politicians, made their way to where they thought the soldiers were being held and tried to effect their release. I'll say that again. A mob of Israeli protesters made its way to the facility where they thought the soldiers, filmed apparently raping a prisoner, were being held, and they sought to illegally effect their release. The soldiers have now been released. I think all of them have now been placed under house arrest. They've been released from the military incarceration and placed under house arrest. And protesters shouting, "This is Sodom," an Old Testament reference, of course, to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, are arguing publicly that Israeli soldiers should be able to mistreat Palestinian detainees however they want. This is part of the defense of the same soldiers who were arrested for the abuse of the male Palestinian prisoner at the Stay Taman base. And Israel is our ally. As I say, the reservists, I think, have now been released. Certainly some of them have, put into house arrest, and politicians and journalists have joined in. So here is an Israeli journalist called Yehuda Schlesinger, filmed on Israeli television. I stress that point. This is from last week. He says, "I don't give a rat's ass what they do," speaking of the soldiers, to that Hamas man, speaking of the prisoner. "I always remember, first of all, the only problem for me here is that it's not a regulated policy of the state to abuse the detainees." A stone-cold war crime, which he thinks should actually be legally ratified in Israel, because he says, first, they deserve it, and it's great revenge that we should give them. So the idea that Israeli atrocities enjoy support from public figures, up to and including the point where they claim that they have every right to be every bit as abominable and barbaric as Hamas members were on the October the 7th terror attack, has become completely irrefutable. He adds that it may also serve as a deterrent. He has since called his comments a mistake, so it would appear that there is still a point beyond which Israeli public figures are currently not prepared to go. Israel's Channel 12 aired a leaked video of the alleged assault. Again, I stress that in case you're thinking of wasting time telling me not to trust Al Jazeera. So Israel's own Channel 12 aired a leaked video of the alleged assault, prompting Bezalel Smotrich, who remains a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, to say that those who leaked the video should be prosecuted and not the soldiers. Those who leaked the video should be prosecuted and not the soldiers filmed in the video apparently raping a prisoner. The National Security Minister, I'll say that again, the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has been filmed stating that any action is permissible if it is done for the sake of national security, bearing in mind that the victim in this footage is already in prison. So quite how any case can be made for claiming that it was somehow, how can a sexual assault ever be in the interests of national security? Israel's own High Court has been hijacked by supporters of the soldiers filmed apparently raping a prisoner. They arrived there to resist a petition to close down the base where it happened. They heckled judges, they heckled the courtroom. And I don't know if I'm the first person to bring this story to your attention. I've got a horrible feeling I am. And yet, of course, when details subsequently disputed of the October the 7th atrocity in Israel undertaken by Hamas were first reported, some of those reports subsequently turned out not to be true, but there are obviously a catalogue of disgusting conduct. Every T was crossed, every I was dotted. The level of reporting, the scale of reporting was extraordinary. I was personally, constantly being exhorted to watch hideous footage, to cover on my show all of the, long after Israel had started exacting its bloody revenge upon entirely innocent Palestinians. I was under constant rhetorical bombardment to talk more about the subsequently disputed or disproved details of elements of that horrible attack. And yet I am probably the first person to bring this to your attention. I understand why people who have been somewhat unquestioning in their support of Israel over the years and over recent months aren't talking about it, but I don't really understand why the rest of us aren't. I don't really understand why it is. It's not creative avoidance, is it, Bob? It's something else. To speak for myself, I feel sick. And I don't like feeling sick. And that will be part of the reason why I could have talked myself out of doing this today. But what's happened here now is that media querulousness and epic double standards have gifted the modern state of Israel, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, an almost unbelievable impunity. To the point where Israeli citizens, politicians, and public figures, when presented with evidence of a prisoner being raped, protest the prosecution of the rapists. A national security minister responds to the leaking of footage depicting the rape of a prisoner by calling for the people who leaked the footage to be prosecuted, while a mob arrives at the prison where they believe the rapists are being held, demanding their release. And of all the times I have sat here and said to you, I cannot make sense of this story. This is, by some distance, the best example of that. An absolute abomination. An atrocity beyond my comprehension, but compounded by public support for the culprits. And if you cast your mind back to October of last year, when it was almost a capital offence to point out that the Palestinian people in Gaza had legitimate grievances about their historical treatment, without even flirting with the notion of defending or condoning in any way the barbarism of the terrorists on that day, nobody who takes money on a monthly basis to comment upon current affairs has, to the best of my knowledge, publicly revoked their support for Israel, publicly acknowledged that things have now gone to a point that they cannot credit and cannot even begin to condone. They have all gone silent. And I don't understand why, because look, let me show you how easy it is. This is barbarism. This is inhumanity on a scale that I thought had been consigned to the history books. This is behavior so disgusting, so despicable, that just when you think you might have got your head around it, along come protesters demanding the release of the culprits. So how did this happen? 0345 6060 973. And how can anybody now look me in the eye and say we haven't reached the point that we predicted many months ago, when everybody, whatever their relationship with the historic state of Israel, with the Palestinian people, or with Benjamin Netanyahu's government, nobody now can argue that the international community has gifted, well, America particularly, and the United Kingdom to a degree, have gifted Benjamin Netanyahu's regime impunity upon a scale we have never seen before, to actually have protests outside the prison where the rapists are being held in support and defense of the rapists, to have public demonstrations demanding that soldiers are free to behave in this way. And all of the people who have been arguing, or were arguing last year, that as Israel's response needed to be proportionate, but goodness me, it also needed to be bloody. Where are they? Where are they? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. It's 24 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. How has this happened? How has this happened? And what on earth happens next? 26 minutes after 10. So how has Israel gone from securing or enjoying, for want of a better word, the deserved sympathy of the civilized world after the October the 7th terror attack to praying, in a sense, that nobody will notice supporters of the current government protesting outside a prison that soldiers filmed apparently raping a prisoner are being detained? It's an extraordinary reversal, aided and abetted by the silence, in many ways, of outlets and platforms that for many months after October the 7th talked of little else. Breed is in Lewisham. Breed, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James. Thanks for listening to me. I just want to say I went over to Israel for my first time on about the 4th of October.
Gosh.
And in conversation with people, I was really stunned by their attitudes towards the Palestinians. And it reminded me of, the Second World War, when people didn't treat Jews like humans. It was that sort of seeing the Palestinians as less than. And when we went into Palestine, and then October the 7th happened, we were treated with such kindness by these very ordinary people who are just trying to get on with their lives. Sorry, it makes me very emotional.
Well, it makes me very emotional. Can I ask why you were there?
Just because we wanted to try and understand it. You know, we've heard so much about
and this was before the obviously before the October the 7th terror attack.
Yeah, we woke up in Bethlehem to missiles flying over our heads. And that was the beginning of 3 days of hell. But during all of that time, the Palestinian people who were so in contrast to the wealth the other side of the wall, they were living in such poverty, and that they were so kind to us and got us out.
How do you? You've talked about dehumanisation. It wouldn't be the first time in history that had happened. But I mean, how do you, as you listen to me sharing the details of these latest stories today?
Yeah.
How do you make sense? How can you even begin to understand how human beings can behave in this way? I felt the same on October the 7th, for the record, but this is sort of a it's formalised behaviour. It's public protests. The idea that somebody is filmed committing a hideous crime, and you marshal public support for the criminal. How does it happen?
You have to not believe that that person is worthy as a human being. And that's what I experienced when I was there in conversation with
that's how the
really
terrorists behave.
People.
That's how the terrorists behave on October the 7th. What's the difference?
Well, I asked the Palestinians about when October the 7th kicked off, and it was terrifying for the people in the West Bank, terrifying for the children who were being pulled out of school at 10 in the morning.
More terrifying for the people at the music festival that was attacked, of course, but the fear of what revenge or response would look like would have kicked in pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, I couldn't. I was talking to these families as they were bringing their children out of the school, and we were saying, how do you feel about Hamas? And then everybody seemed to acknowledge that Hamas are lunatics. But when you've got no voice at all, the Gazaans felt that at least somebody was standing up for them. Because honestly, James, when you cross that wall, it's like night and day. On one side of the wall, you had opulence, fruit, vegetables, life, hope, and on the other side it was almost biblical. It was such an apartheid. I was so stunned.
And that's before the bombing started. So if you think that the contrast was stark then, you need to look at the huge swathes of the Gaza Strip that have now been razed to the ground. The idea of it being visibly and violently different before the latest bombardment started is chilling, isn't it? A message from a friend of mine who has been also, like Breed, has been to Israel and has Israeli family, a Jewish friend of mine who I'm glad you're listening, but I can't imagine what it's like to be in your position at the moment. She tells me it's even worse, James, than you described. They were also calling the protesters to hurt the army attorney who ordered the investigation into the soldiers, so much so that she now has her own security detail. They seek to hurt anyone who is in disagreement with them. And a lot of people I know back in Israel, are now calling for a three-state solution, a Palestinian state, a Jewish democratic state, and a state for the barbaric fanatics like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and their ilk. The despair now runs that deep. That is despair among ordinary Israelis. It's 10:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, I'm asking how this can happen in a democratic state, in a British ally. But I'm also asking why more people aren't talking about it. Thomas Watts has your headlines. It is 10:35 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We feared this point would come, and it probably came months ago, the point at which the world could even, America essentially, could either pull the plug on Benjamin Netanyahu's regime or end up in a position of such epic hypocrisy that it almost beggars belief. Please stop killing civilians. Here's some more bombs. Please stop killing civilians. Here's some more bombs. And yet that moment of admission is still very hard to credit, isn't it? This is a government, and listen, there'll be millions of people in it, hundreds of thousands of people in Israel, just as disgusted by what we're describing today as we are. But the government, the elected government, albeit that it's cobbled together in a desperate attempt by Benjamin Netanyahu to keep himself out of court, the democratic government contains people who are calling for Israeli soldiers to be permitted to do whatever they want to Palestinian prisoners or Palestinian civilians in some case. So that point has been reached. And I don't understand how it's happened, how it's been allowed to happen, but I also don't understand why we're not talking about it more when, for example, reports that were never proved of babies being beheaded during the October the 7th terror attack. The Sun had it on its front page, of course, but they avoided sanction for that because they argued that they had only presented the information as a claim rather than stating it as a fact. So, but they put it in quotes, savages, quotes, beheaded babies, end quotes, in massacre. So they could argue, and they did argue successfully, that they did not breach the accuracy rules in the editor's code of practice because it was reported as a claim rather than as an actual fact. Lots of other media, including Le Monde in France and American newspapers, have looked into the claims, and let's just say they've never been proved. And yet this footage, actual footage of a war crime being committed in an Israeli facility, has prompted members of the Israeli government and media and public to protest against the pursuit of the perpetrators. Tony's in Greenock. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's truly sickening, James. It really is.
No, I'm not. Anyway.
From me, I think the blame lies squarely at the shoulders of, as you say, the American government, the UK government as well, to an extent. But mainly, I think, within the media channels. You said at the start of your show there that a lot of people will probably be hearing this for the first time. And unless you're quite active on Twitter,
sure,
you wouldn't have seen or
unless you watch Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera English. And there are some, you're right. Unless you get a lot of your information from social media, as opposed to legacy media, then this probably would have passed you by. Elements of it had passed me by because I was on holiday during some of the relevant moments.
And this has only come to light because somebody has leaked it. And I believe the person who's leaked it, they're wanting to lynch that person as well. Now, that's what we're seeing. But the other things that we're not hearing about, the daily settler violence against people in the West Bank,
It's part. I nearly stopped you there and said, "Can we just focus on the thing that we're talking about?" But you're describing various facets of dehumanization, aren't you? So I won't stop.
It all plays into the same narrative, in my opinion, and this is just a very, very hopefully horrible end game that is going to come about. But I can't see how things will change when a large chunk of people in the country that it's happening in are quite violently for this happening. They see a rape of a Palestinian person as not a crime because they don't see them as human.
Well, the National Security Minister sees the leaking of the footage as the crime.
Yes, exactly. Now, where have we seen this kind of behaviour before, James?
Well, we've seen it throughout history. We've seen we've seen the consequences. We saw it, I suppose, most recently, perhaps in Rwanda. We've seen it throughout history. We saw it in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. We've seen it in Rwanda more recently. We saw it in the former Yugoslavia. I mean, no one is immune from this behaviour. Nobody. We saw it on October the 7th in Israel itself. We saw barbarism, inhumanity that could only be undertaken by people who believed in the fundamental inferiority of the people they were attacking. But as a British journalist, I've spent decades believing that Israel was different from its enemies, better than its enemies.
Okay.
And I can't sustain that belief anymore. I don't think I can. How can you? Israel, and listen, I'm being unfair. The BBC has reported this. I'll read you what they wrote, but not on anything like the scale that some people might expect. Israeli far-right protesters broke into an army base in a show of support for soldiers accused of severely mistreating. It's a euphemism there, an understandable euphemism. And this story contains a trigger warning. It says this story contains a description of alleged sexual abuse. Israeli far-right protesters broke into an army base in a show of support for soldiers accused of severely mistreating a Palestinian prisoner there. Large crowds gathered outside the State Haman compound after Israeli military police entered it to detain the reservists who are now subject to an official investigation. This is going back to the end of July. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement strongly condemning the incident and calling for an immediate calming of passions. And yet, of course, there are members of his cabinet who are heroes to the protesters, and they remain in his cabinet. Haaretz been reporting on tortures going on there for ages. I think the New York Times had evidence of this story back in January, and yet the media interest is a tiny scintilla of what it was for covering this conflict, for want of a better word, back in October of last year. 10:42 is the time. Farah is in Southfields. Farah, what would you like to say?
I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you for talking about this subject. I'm somebody who's been following this, and I've seen the videos and some previous ones as well. So it is really upsetting. But you've asked how have they got to the point where they can sort of get away with it, kind of thing. And it actually starts all at the sort of the beginning of, so for me, it looks like it started from the way that Israel's been given impunity from the point that it was created. And where I say that is that there have been lots of United Nations resolutions, lots of, that they need to respect international law and respect humanitarian law. It brings us on to this whole concept of the occupied territories, the rights that Palestinians have. And the thing is that whether you call it colonialism or not, when you start at that point and you start disregarding the indigenous population, then disregarding their actual rights, then disregarding international law that applies to them to take care of people. And there are different rules, for if you're occupying people. That has all been disregarded over the last 75 odd years, and partly because the US vetoes every time, somebody's critical of Israel, they veto it and protect it. I think it's 66 times that they've actually vetoed it. I need to check that fact, but I think it's something quite huge. And then you're going to give a country, whether it be Israel or anybody else, the idea that you can do whatever you like. And it's a progressive thing. It's a bit like cancer. I've had cancer, so I know what I'm talking about. It starts off small and it spreads. And the problem with this is that where we are now, seeing these horrific pictures, the things that we're seeing in the media now, I've I've heard from Palestinian friends. I've heard them from Israeli friends about things that happen. And last week, I think it was B'Tselem, which is the Israeli human rights organization. They published reports, 118 pages on these what's happening to the Palestinians and these prisoners, and they've entitled it "Welcome to Hell." And this is an Israeli, human rights organization. So there's no bias here. They are actually talking about what's happening within their own country. But I think when you start a country where you say it's a land for people, for people without a land, when you dismiss that there's a population there in the first place, is it any wonder that we are where we are? And I think the reason why
to me it is. Maybe I'm a bit naive, but the shifting of international borders throughout the millennia is not confined to the Middle East. No. I was looking at a map of Africa the other day, and that also has incredibly straight lines drawn through it by presumably white colonialists a couple of hundred years ago. So it's not. It is not the case that the nature of the formation of the modern state of Israel renders the scenes that we're discussing today inevitable. I don't think I buy that, if that's what you're saying.
No, but I think the way that they've been allowed to ignore international law is, if you say that you don't have to play by the same rules as the rest of us, then why would they listen to us? So they have, and yes, you are absolutely right. Their government is the most far-right government that country has seen. And not for a second am I saying every Israeli supports them, because we know that they don't. They were protesting against Netanyahu 41 weeks before, September,
yes.
October the 7th. So that's not the case. And I see plenty on social media, probably because it's in my algorithm, where I'm seeing normal Israelis absolutely appalled and protesting. But that's not shown on. It's not really picked up by the media. It's there. There's plenty, thousands of them, who are absolutely appalled. And quite frankly, they would like their country back, thanks very much, from the people who are, ruining it. But I think one thing that I was having this conversation when I was at the anti-racism march on Saturday at the Reform UK office, and I was speaking to somebody, and she said, well, the state of Palestine, why was it not created? And I said, I don't know, because my ancestry, my parents are Pakistani.
You mean back in 48?
Yeah, back in 48. So my parents were actually born in India, so they moved to Pakistan. And what happened today is, I think it's India's Independence Day. So what happens is that when that land was partitioned, India was recognised, and a sovereign state of Pakistan was recognised. And in my head, the question is always, when Palestine was partitioned and Israel was created, why wasn't the same done for the Palestinians, a sovereign state?
I don't know.
It makes no sense to me.
No, it makes no sense to me. And sometimes I have been in the past a little bit dismissive of attempts to bring the broader history into the conversation. And I realise listening to you that it's partly due to my own ignorance. I'm not confident in a conversation about this kind of thing, but that's a reason to talk about it more, isn't it? Not less. We admit our confusion. I don't understand that either. Some people may, some historians may have answers to those questions, but if you are trying to understand behaviour in Israel today, it makes perfect sense to go back to the beginning of the modern state of Israel. But I definitely don't agree with you that there's an inevitability to what we're seeing, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a relationship. Farah, thank you. It's 10:48. 10:51 is the time. There's lots of areas where we can find out more or learn more about a lot of what's going on. There's an excellent long read in The Guardian by a former IDF soldier and historian of genocide called Omar Bartov, who has written an extraordinary piece describing how deeply disturbed he was by his recent visit to Israel, and indeed by far-right students seeking to picket a lecture that he was poised to give in June of this year. It's too long, really, for me to précis, but it is. It's a first-hand account by someone who used to be in the IDF, so I guess unlike me, you'd struggle to accuse him of being Britain's #1 Jew hater, which pops up in my inbox with remarkable regularity. And also reading a tweet from, a private message actually from a pal of mine earlier, and mentioning her family in Israel and her own Jewishness. Said one texter accuses me of lying. So you couldn't possibly have Jewish friends because you hate us. And to which I'd just respond by saying, mate, have a listen back to the programme. Listen to other programmes. Listen to the number of Jewish people that have called me over the years. Listen to the conversations that I've had that have led to me being accused of being precisely the opposite, a tool of Zionism. And then give your head a bit of a wobble. Unfortunately, you'd have to get it out of your backside first, wouldn't you? 10:52 is the time. Jim's in Glasgow. Jim, what would you like to say? What's going on?
Right, Brian. Well, what's going on, James, is 40 years, as far as the UK is concerned, we've had 40 years of just ignoring this because it's too complex to deal with. So we've just let Israel do more or less what they've been doing in Gaza and the West Bank. Now, talking about the West Bank, Ben Gazir was there the other day with a crowd of Israelis, and they went into one of the holy mosques, which they're not supposed to be doing. Now, this is the first step in letting people know there that this belongs to them, in contradiction to what they're supposed to be doing.
The bit I don't... Well, I mean, obviously it's incredibly stupid of me to have thought you can conduct any of these conversations without reference to history, but I do want to zone in on today, on the today of it. And because it's not true that things have been ignored. The coverage, because Israel is an ally, because so many people who live in the United Kingdom have strong links to the modern state of Israel, because it is, despite being in the Middle East, it has been historically perceived and depicted as a Western democracy. We obviously talk more about events in Israel than we would do in totalitarian countries in that part of the world, or countries with which the British citizenry doesn't have deep and historical links. Why the purdah on this? And I've mentioned the BBC's coverage of bits of it. I've mentioned, but every front page in the country was reporting, I felt correctly, on the October the 7th atrocity, and yet the incomparable casualty number, death toll, abuses, atrocities. You've got an Israeli newspaper talking about sadistic abuse like the kind the soldiers who were detained for questioning on Monday are suspected. I hardly hear it anywhere. I hardly see it anywhere. I don't get that. Is that just embarrassment?
No, I think what's happened here is now when Suella Braverman was the Home Secretary.
Yes.
And we had people out in the streets in London, all over the UK. She called them hate marches.
That's true.
No, that's one of the reasons why people are, we better not say too much here, because you're then branded as anti-Semitic. You can be pro-Palestinian and not be anti-Semitic. That's how it was coming across.
Well, intellectually you can, but you're not allowed to be in the world that is created by positions like Suella Braverman's. I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, and if more people watched Al Jazeera, this is why he doesn't want anybody from the West getting in there to film what's happening, because we know this has been happening. Al Jazeera is one of the best outlets to look at this.
So is Haaretz, actually. Yes. An Israeli newspaper with a very, very, very long history. In fact, I was reading a Len Deighton novel the other day set in Berlin Wall coming down Germany, and they were referencing reports in Haaretz in there. So, it is there. The information is there, but I don't know, the coverage isn't.
You demean people. As you're talking about the 1930s, this is where it's going. This is how it's going down that road.
How does it end then? You've got a national security minister calling for the prosecution of the people who leaked this video in which these soldiers appear to be raping a prisoner. And you've got people trying to storm the prison, seeking their release before any legal process or due process has been able to occur.
Well,
you've got the army attorney who ordered the investigation in the first place, compelled to have her own security detail to protect her from people who have professed a desire to do her harm. And the most powerful ally of Israel is essentially, although Kamala Harris's rhetoric looks to be a little firmer than Joe Biden's, they are essentially saying, please stop killing children, here are some more bombs.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago, James, that we had a newspaper here calling judges enemies of the state.
Yes, enemies of the people, actually.
We have to be very careful.
Not to sound smug and pompous and superior.
No. And look at this right wing, because most of Europe's going that way as well.
Elements are. I don't know, actually. I suppose
we have to watch the right wing.
After watching the riots, the idea that you can treat other human beings with absolute contempt because you genuinely consider them to be inferior or to be the root of your problems. I hadn't even thought of that either. Thank you, Jim. It is 10:57, and Keir Starmer has signed a letter this week. Woo, zip-de-doo, with the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, and Emmanuel Macron in France, which again is. I know we don't do much when it comes to the supply of arms to Israel, but the idea that the position that we seem to have adopted in the West or in the Anglo sphere is now it's evolved to please stop doing this. Please stop doing this. By the way, here's some more bombs. And listen, I know that war isn't binary. I know that diplomacy, more importantly, isn't binary. International relations are complicated, and the idea that there are simple answers to complicated questions is a large part of the reason why this country, as Jim just reminded us, finds itself in such difficult territory. But there's a fundamental contradiction at the heart of Western policy, including Keir Starmer's governments at the moment, which is please stop doing it. But we won't do anything if you don't. That would be the UK position. Please stop doing it. But we won't do anything if you don't stop doing it. We won't take any meaningful action, really. And America, even worse, is please stop doing it. Please stop doing it. This is unconscionable now. Here are some more bombs. And I don't think those are matters of opinion, are they? I think that's just a statement of fact. That is the American government position. Please stop doing it. Here's some more bombs. And you wonder why we struggle. We mere mortals who are not strutters on the stage of international politics. You wonder why we struggle to understand some of this stuff. Extraordinary. Thank you for that. You can probably tell from my voice, I find it personally harrowing. I told you yesterday, it's never going to happen. If it was ever going to happen, it would have happened by now. I haven't been able to grow skin thick enough in doing this job not to be affected by some of the stuff we talk about. And I don't think the next hour will be any different either. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. We've been having quite a lot of conversations in my world about uptick, sounds like an inadequate word, doesn't it? About a massive increase, anecdotally, in what my daughters and her friends are experiencing in public in Britain. And this is essentially reference to harassment and sexual offences, which is why when I saw the front page of the Times today, I was supremely unsurprised. That newspaper reports rail attacks on women up 50%. So I don't think this is one of those figures that can be attributed to counting. I suppose that the periods that we spent not travelling anywhere by rail may have contributed in part to the contrast, but the number of violent attacks against women and girls on Britain's railways has increased by more than 50% over the past 2 years. Violent crimes rising from 7,561 to 11,357. And crucially, I think, sexual harassment reports doubling. This is a survey commissioned by British Transport Police finding that more than a third of women had been subjected to sexual harassment or sexual offences while commuting by train or tube. 51% of those who had been victims of sexual offending said that other passengers had tried to help them, which means 49% had not. I don't think in the first instance that this is a morning for sharing stories of being on the receiving end of this kind of behaviour, because I think we all know what that is like. I may review this position shortly, but at the moment, I'm not minded to do that because I don't know how illuminating it would be. The statistics are the story. The two questions that occur to me reading this, and I may be subconsciously indulging in male privilege, in which case, by all means, give my head a wobble. But the two stories here that occur to me, the two questions that jump out at me are, why is something that I genuinely thought was in abeyance. You know, the experiences of my wife's generation were supposed to be worse than the experiences of my daughter's generation. And I don't think they are. And yet the effort that has been put in, was there a hiatus in this phenomenon? Was there a period where things actually got better for women and now they're getting worse again? I think there was. I genuinely think there was. In fact, look, I've been doing this job for 20... Would you believe it? I know. I can't believe I look so young. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I was only 8 when I got the job. I was doing this job for 20 years, right? And there have been enormous social changes in that period. The biggest of which in this field would be the calls I took 20 years ago from women of a certain age who insisted, I know I go on about this a bit, but it really threw me at the time, who insisted that having their bottoms pinched at work by senior male colleagues was a compliment or was flattering. Similarly, people who would tell me that they like being wolf whistled, and I would say, well, you might like being wolf whistled, but as a general rule, it's probably not something we should be encouraging. And so there's been a real sea change. I told you, didn't I, the other day about the first time I realised how obnoxious, how disgusting it is for an old man to say to a young colleague, a young female colleague, oh, if I was 20 years younger, if only I was 20 years younger. That's an extraordinarily violent verbal assault in a way. And yet when I was growing up, it would have seemed relatively innocuous. Even perhaps a compliment. He would certainly have thought he was complimenting a young woman by telling her that well, you don't need me to join the dots for you. So I knew that the world had changed. But I don't know why it appears to be changing back. And if you confine the conversation to railways, it is changing back. And I want to know why you think that is. 0345 6060 973. Especially, and this might be the hardest call to make, especially if you are the parent. Well, it's not just going to be young men doing it. So the stories we've heard recently, and these are pretty grim, but not anything like as grim as the issues we were discussing in the last hour, happily. The stories we've encountered recently, and I've got an 18-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old daughter, and they both got big circles of friends. One was actually on a train, 16-year-old girl on a train, trying to mind her own business. Man sits down next to her and starts trying to engage her in conversation. She couldn't make it any clearer that she doesn't want to be engaged in conversation. So he then takes a sketchbook out of his bag, starts drawing her, and hands her the photo, the drawing that he's done, the sketch that he's done, and she is naked in that picture. It's a form of sexual harassment I'd never come across before. And she didn't know what to do. And it was clear that she was uncomfortable. And nobody in that railway carriage did anything. That is an area in which I'm interested in personal experience. If you found yourself, because I am a man who would like to help in those situations, and I think many times we are held back. I tell you who I'd really like to have in that carriage. Sheila flipping Fogarty. She wouldn't take any prisoners at all. I'll tell you that for nothing. But I don't know whether some of us sometimes hold back because we're worried about making the situation worse. We're worried about drawing attention to ourselves in an unhelpful way. I don't think it's the fear of being hurt in the same way that you may not intervene in other forms of antisocial behaviour or criminality. You could say, well, I didn't do anything because I was worried I'd get stabbed, for example. I don't think that applies in these cases. But there is it a peculiarly British thing not to intervene in that way? I mean, it's clearly not unique because I just told you about the attitude of a club in Berlin to sexual assault on its own premises from its own security team, from a member of its own security team. But the sense abroad that men are behaving... Well, I can't say that they're behaving worse or better. Of course I can't. But I can tell you that the figures are rocketing. The only figures we've got are confined to railway carriages. But if it's happening in railway carriages, it's almost certainly happening elsewhere as well, isn't it? So why do we think that is? Why would there have been an exponential increase in instances of sexual harassment and violence against women? Why do we think that is? What's changing in our society? 0345 6060973. But the permanent... well, no, that's not the word I want, actually. The personal experience stories that I want here are the ones about intervention. Whether you were the victim of the harassment and somebody came to your aid, you were a victim of the offence and nobody came to your aid. You still can't believe that nobody came to your aid. And then some advice, actually, on what the best thing to do is. So let's just use that example there of a man in his 30s, we reckon, and a 16-year-old girl. And he is harassing her, clearly harassing her. His attentions are not welcome. And nobody in the train carriage did anything. I like to think that I would have done, but I can't bet my house on it. I did something once, but it was so long ago I barely remembered the details. I just pretended to know somebody and went and sat next to them. And on that occasion it worked. But with somebody else, possibly that would have spooked her even more than she was already, because it would have looked like two people were paying her unwanted attention. But somehow that day, that evening, Earl's Court, God, I don't know where that came from, that worked on that occasion. So what works? What should you do when you find yourself in that situation? And why do we think that this kind of misogyny, I think that's a mild word to use, criminality, behaviour, is getting worse? And with respect, I don't want I want you to base it upon what you've watched and seen and experienced, rather than a sort of broad societal overview. I think, and I've got a call from Scotland who's blaming it on the way women dress. So I don't think we need to trouble ourselves any further with that contributor, do we? Thus speaks a potential abuser, of course, who thinks that women are asking for it by wearing short skirts. That's a tough conversation to have with teenage girls, isn't it? Is the absolute freedom to wear whatever you want, but the acknowledgement that people exist who think that if you did get assaulted, then it would somehow be your fault because of your sartorial choices. So that's what I want to know. Why do we think this is happening? 0345 606 0973. And what can the rest of us do? What should the rest of us do? What have the rest of us done in your experience? All right, hit the numbers now. You will get through. I need help with this because it's one of those curious hinterlands, isn't it, between statistics and anecdote. Jess Phillips is the new Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women. She's been tireless in this space, but she has, and she describes these levels as unacceptable. I liked her words. She said, in this day and age, no woman should have to plan her journeys by public transport based on where and when she will feel safe. And yet that is the daily experience for millions of women, whether they are commuting to and from work or arranging an evening out with friends. And I don't think most of us fully appreciate that. So what is that like? Why is this happening? And what should the rest of us be doing about it? 11:15 is the time. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. John's in Fareham. John, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I've got two daughters myself, James. They're a little bit older than yours. My oldest one's 33 and my youngest is 30 now.
Right.
And my oldest one works in London and uses public transport quite frequently. And she's had numerous occasions when she's been sort of verbally abused, with kind of sexual innuendo.
Yeah.
And she's, kind of forthright enough to coming forward to sort of fight that off. But
Yes.
I was saying to your researcher, there seems to have been an upturn since the likes of Tate started talking. It seems to be between the 18 and 25-year-old male population now that seems to be emboldened recently. You were saying, was there a hiatus when it stopped? And I believe there was, but I think in sort of like the last 7-8 years, with the advent of basically idiots like this guy, a lot of people have bought into it and have started to become overtly sexual towards women and girls. And it seems to be a growing phenomenon.
We don't know. You and I don't know that, do we? We're just tourists in this world, really, or we're relying upon evidence from people that we care about and people that we love. Women might say nothing's really changed at all. It's just the words of the song never changed, just the tune. But I think you're right to reference Andrew Tate. And again, I think I was wrong over the last couple of years to ignore these people, this story, this person in particular, on the grounds that giving people who are clearly so desperate for attention is not the right way to respond. Again, it's something Sheila Fogarty got right and I got wrong, because if people are being influenced, and some of the numbers he has racked up on socials over the year are extraordinary, and that message is reaching young children. I remember teachers telling me about what boys in their classes were believing and saying. And the next stage of that evolution will be for those boys to become men and to still believe these things and to articulate them and act in a way that reflects those beliefs when they find themselves out in public. So, I think you're absolutely right. There must be a link.
Yeah. So my youngest daughter's cabin crew for BA,
right.
And she obviously is based in Heathrow at Terminal 4, and I kind of got to the point where she'd have to get an early morning tube or train, the first one to get there. But I just went, no, I'll drive you there, because it doesn't seem to matter what time of day it is. We have this idea of kind of rowdy guys coming home from clubs or pubs or sort of on a Friday night. But Nick Ferrari was speaking to a couple of ladies this morning, and it's at 10 o'clock in the morning. There doesn't seem to be.
Well, this is the commute.
This
is absolutely right. So the survey looks, I think, specifically even at things happening during commuting, and the stories that I've heard over the last couple of days have been very much in what you'd call peak hours or daylight hours. Not by any stretch, not excusing it happening at chucking out time on the pub, but just perhaps expecting it a little more. John, thank you. James, I recently confronted two men making sexual remarks to a young woman on a very busy train home from Liverpool Street, and not one other person stood up to confront them. In my opinion, this is due to a fear of verbal or physical altercation being directed at them. I gave the young woman my business card and told her to call me once she was safely home. And I then got a call from her husband later that evening thanking me for stepping in. I feel this kind of crime is on the increase due to a lack of discipline and respect being taught at home. And it makes me feel sick that women are fearful to travel alone due to the actions of some individuals. Nicely put, Blake. The problem with the home argument is that you might have parents who are just as outraged and disgusted by these behaviours as we are, who don't know what their boys are looking at online. That's where we come back to John's point about Andrew Tate and his ilk, isn't it? Abigail's in Dartford. Abigail, what would you like to say?
Hello. So I work for a podcast that's targeted at the trades industry, like the skilled trade industry. And we recently had a young lady on called Elise who works as an electrician.
Yes.
And she recently shared a story with us of when she was working as a 17-year-old apprentice. And in the workplace, she was told by a supervisor that she was wearing the wrong colour boots and they needed to get her new work boots in.
Right.
So on the day that they gave her the new work boots, excuse me.
That's all right, take your time.
No, sorry, I just had a bit of a dry throat. Her supervisor and her manager had invited them into the office in an enclosed room. They closed the door behind her. Two men. Right. Two grown men, and she was a 17-year-old apprentice. And they said, bend over the desk. And she got really nervous and laughed out of nervousness and said, what? And they said, well, bend over the desk. So she kind of sort of leant round the desk and saw that her new work boots were around the desk, and they erupted in laughter. And we shared this promo on our socials, and the comments have been absolutely deplorable, saying, well, she was asking for the attention. It's just banter. If women can't hack the banter, they shouldn't be in the workplace, or they shouldn't be in the trade sector.
And this is current, this is recent?
Yes, this was posted over the weekend. It's currently sitting around 120,000 views. And as the social media manager, I've been sort of having to safeguard her from the comments. And the comments have been absolutely deplorable, that men think that, well, not all men, but the comments that we've had have all been on men, saying that it's a joke, making sexual and vulgar comments regarding women in the workplace. And at the moment, the trade sector has a massive skills shortage.
Yes, it does.
And women, this is the experience that women currently have within the trade.
And it's so relevant to what we're talking about, because the response explains the behaviour, doesn't it?
That's it. And they're not understanding that, at 17 years old, she's still a minor. So overall, that's not what that's the experience that she's had. But the response from men in the comments have been, well, it's a joke, it's banter, they're just having a laugh.
What do you want to give the podcast a mention, Abigail? You've been very good in not smuggling in a plug, and although you couldn't resist a little boast about your numbers.
No, I only mentioned the numbers because
I know, I'm teasing
we don't usually get the traction. Sure. So it's a popular topic. I felt it was relevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's called Off the Job Podcast. Thank you.
And it looks at issues, well, for women in particular, or for everybody in the trades?
It's a podcast about within just general experience and working within the trade sector in the UK.
Okay. And how is the young woman involved? How is Ellie?
So Ellie is fine. I checked on her over the weekend, and she said she's doing fine. But a comment that she made that made me sad is that she's just used to it.
Yeah, and that is oddly when the Me Too hashtag took off, the educational nature of it for many men was deeply embarrassing, because we'd go, how did we not know more about this? And the answer was, well, because it's so commonplace, we don't talk about it. And yet, when women did, many of us were still shocked. Abigail, thank you, and good luck with the podcast. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. I mean, that's different as well, because it's not a public space, so it's not as if anybody could have intervened. But the poor young woman is both vulnerable and betrayed, really, by her colleagues, by her superiors, by men who are in positions of power. I won't squeeze Karen, who's on next, into the remaining time before the news headlines, because these are not stories or experiences that you can gloss over very quickly or move on. Hey, Christina makes a great point when, of course, Donald Trump revealed that he routinely sexually assaults women because he believes, as a famous person, that he can. They were public figures in this country, most obviously Nigel Farage, who, of course, described it as locker room talk. So, when you've got apparently respectable figures in public life excusing extremely powerful people like Donald Trump when they talk about grabbing women by their genitals, you send out two messages. At the very, very worst, you send out the message that it's okay to grab women by their genitals, or at least that the reason why I like Donald Trump is because I wish I could, but I don't. And then at the very, very least, you've got people like Nigel Farage minimising the claim that it is okay to grab women by the genitals by describing it. And I think, as Christina's reminded me, he did indeed use that word, locker room talk, as if Nigel Farage has been anywhere near a locker room in his life. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a 50% increase in attacks on women on railways, which I think we can fairly conclude reflects a much broader truth across the whole of society. And we're wondering why, and what on earth you and me, what we can do about it. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 33 minutes after 11 is the time, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why is it, is it maybe not getting better or worse? I think that is probably a bit of male privilege kicking in, but maybe it's changing. Emma, as ever, puts it very helpfully. There's never been a hiatus in harassment. There have been different trends and flavours, but never an actual let-up. The current trend or flavour, rather than paternalistic condescension, is overt incel-related violence. And I do draw a link between the consumption of influencers like Tate at a formative age. Those original 13-year-old viewers are now adults and have been radicalised into misogyny. That's part of the reason for changes. But when you talk about a doubling of certain types of incidents, then you can, I suppose, reflect upon an exponential increase and acknowledge that there used to be less of it. But as Emma reminds us, only perhaps in terms of tone and content rather than in terms of actual offence and intent. Karen is in Reading. Karen, what would you like to say?
I just think sexual violence has just been normalised. I had experience when I was in London last summer. I was on a 18 bus heading out of central London. A lady with her child was sitting in front of me. She was sort of sitting near the where you put your pushchair and everything. The bus was getting busy. She put her child on her lap, moved over. A man got on. And within a few minutes, I saw her sort of trying to creep towards the window.
Yeah. Oh.
And basically, because I'm nosy, I sort of looked over to see what was going on.
But let's not say nosy. Let's say concerned, shall we? Because words are important, aren't they?
So I looked over to see what was going on while she was sort of trying to get closer to the window. And he was playing with himself.
Oh, God.
And the bus was packed. And there were men seeing what he was doing. And nobody said anything. And I just instinctively just shouted out, "Stop it."
And what did he do?
He sort of looked around and sort of, as if almost tell me to mind my own business. He then got up. Other people were basically, then sort of saying stuff. The woman was obviously very distressed because she had her child who looked about 3 or 4 on her lap.
So other people started piling in as well?
Yeah.
Good. But I wonder, that's the point, isn't it? As bystander syndrome, as soon as someone does it, you needed to be there. Otherwise, the other people that piled in may not ever have done anything. Probably,
yeah.
And then what happened?
But he sort of hung around for a little bit. Eventually, he got off the bus, and I stayed. I said I'll stay on with her until she reached her stop.
Oh, you're lovely.
And that's what I did.
Well done. And how was she?
She was okay. I said to her, just go home, make sure you have a cup of tea, do you know what I mean, just to calm yourself. But she was fine.
Is this something you've done before?
It's happened to me on the bus once. I was sitting at the front on the left-hand side and someone got on and, started doing that. And again, I just sort of said, just stop it. It's just instinctive, really.
And there it is. I wonder if there's a difference between men and women doing it. I don't know, but the fear of a response or the fear of escalation or becoming the target is going to apply equally, isn't it, to both? Thank you, Cara. Thank you for what you did, and also thank you for your call, because 51% of people say that women in the latest survey say that other passengers intervened, which I think means, unless I'm missing something, 49%. Had experiences where other passengers did not try to help them. So what the hell do you think you're doing? Stop it. That's a fairly straightforward thing. But what if it's a more inveigling type of harassment? What if it is someone who, if you were to hold them to account, would claim that they were simply paying someone a compliment or simply trying to chat someone up? How do you deal with those scenarios? What should you do I don't know. Karen, take care. Jane's in Manchester. Jane, what would you like to say?
Hello, Jane.
Hello.
My daughter was sexually assaulted on a tram when she was just 17. She was absolutely petrified and she was frozen with fear. He was touching her leg and then he covered his hand and her leg with his coat. And luckily, she was only on for a couple more stops.
Right.
And when she got off, I picked her up, but she was hysterical, in tears. Nobody had helped her. Nobody had done anything.
Would other people have known, do you think, on the bus?
Possibly at the start.
Right.
But once he'd covered his hand, maybe not.
Yeah.
But she was absolutely petrified. We got the police involved, and the transport police. but I had to push them the whole way. They did some DNA on her jeans, only because I pushed them.
Yeah.
They got his photo, because it was on the tram, into the local newspaper.
Really?
But only because I pushed them to do it.
Yes.
They weren't going to do anything. But, yeah, nobody did anything while she was on the tram, sadly.
I'm glad that you got... Did they get him as a result of the stuff? No, okay. No. What did you say to your daughter? How did you comfort your daughter when she came home? What did you do?
It was really distressing, actually.
Yes,
and we were just saying, don't worry about it. It's okay. You're fine. She's had a lot of mental health issues, just generally. But so this was just adding to it. So, yeah, it was really difficult. She was very, very distressed about it.
And you don't know what changes it makes to people moving forward, do you? To their issues of trust, to their issues of safety, their issues of anxiety, their issues of security.
Yeah, I think getting the tram for her was very difficult after that.
This might be a stupid question, and I hope that you will tell me, Jane, if it is. But do you think it's better, worse, or the same for your daughter when she was 17 than it was for you when you were 17?
Well, when I was 15, I was on a bus and with a group of friends, and some guy flashed us. So yeah. I don't know if it's worse now. Maybe it's a bit worse now, because we just all giggled and just run off the bus and thought, oh, that's what blokes do.
Yeah, and in company it's a lot easier perhaps to deal with these things than it is. You feel less vulnerable than you would if you were alone, perhaps.
Yeah, and also we just didn't think that's the most terrible thing. That's an awful thing to do. We just thought, oh gosh, stupid man.
Yeah, no, and you know, again, the difference between a sort of the individual attentions and a kind of public crime pertinent as well, but in the question of commonplace, how commonplace it is. Every single one of my female friends, and I mean every single one, has experienced sexual harassment of some description, writes Charmaine. I'd find that horribly easy to believe. 11:41 is the time. Jenny is in Croydon. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Jenny.
What it was I was at a local music festival with my daughter probably about a couple of summers ago now. So she would have been about, 27. And we were with a big crowd of people, including her boyfriend, but we broke away to try and get through to the toilets. It was very crowded. And as we were walking through, holding hand in hand, she suddenly turned back to these two young men. And what happened is, unbeknown to me, because it was so busy, one of them had pinched her bottom really hard.
Right.
And she turned round, and I was so proud of her. Very calmly, she went up to him, no aggression, didn't even raise her voice, and just said, "Why did you do that? That really hurt. That's not your place to do that, to touch me. Do not do that again, ever." Made him promise not to do it. He went so red. Him and his friend looked mortified. I expect that wasn't the first bottom that they'd had to go at that day. But my point was that I was extremely proud of her, but she obviously felt safe in that environment to approach them in that way.
Yes.
Knowing my daughter, I think she'd have done it anyway. But I've been listening to your callers, and I feel so sad that people are too scared or embarrassed to help out young people when this happens to them on a train or something like that. I just wish that we weren't also scared of something happening to us or to be embarrassed.
I don't even know if it's that. Yes, I think it's more the embarrassment side of it. I don't want to draw attention.
Yes.
We're not a people who draw attention to ourselves. We don't like drawing attention to ourselves. And I got bystander syndrome wrong, actually. Bystander syndrome is when you don't do anything because you're expecting somebody else. You're waiting for somebody else to do it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And do you know what? The way you've told your story about your daughter, if I may just pay you a little compliment, because you've not done it in a way that makes people who wouldn't be as forthright as your daughter feel bad. Because sometimes these conversations, but do you know what I mean? Sometimes these conversations can unintentionally veer into territory that says you should do this and you should do that and you should, but actually, it's some people are made that way and some people aren't. It's not.
Right.
So well done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you,
Jenny. You take care. 11:43 is the time. Nadia is in Balham. Nadia, what would you like to say?
Hi. I'm actually quite nervous telling you about these stories.
Well, take your time.
So there's two incidences. I mean, obviously as a woman, this happens all the time, but these are the two that I'd say has happened in the last year, 2 years. So firstly, I was on the tube station a couple of months ago, heading up to Manchester with my suitcase, packed tube, and I could feel something really hard, like basically squishing my bum.
Right.
I thought, stupidly thought, I must be sitting on the suitcase. Kept moving around, it kept happening. And I didn't really think anything of it because nothing's really happened to me before.
Okay.
I'm trained in self-defense, and in this moment, I turn around and this man is squeezing my bum. And I just completely froze, even though I know how to defend myself.
Yes.
Didn't know what to do in that moment. I completely froze. I was so upset. It's only a guy squeezing your bum. It's not like the end of the world.
No. I understand. Yeah, you're talking about your internal dialogue.
You really, yeah. So you feel violated. And then he looked at me looked eye contact, smiled at me, and jumped off the tube next stop. And I completely froze. I got off the tube straight after. And I called my husband, got completely off the tube. I actually missed my train to Manchester.
Yes.
And I called my husband, and he was saying to me, you should report it. People should report these things. I did report it. I got a lovely caseworker. They found the whole incident on CCTV.
Wow.
It took her a good 2-3 days. She was so quick. She went through all the CCTV footages because I wasn't sure what tube I got on. I just said, I know it was around this time. And she found the incident, saw it happening, saw the man, identified him, but there's nothing that she could do about it because, it's a busy tube. You can't really identify that unless he's done it before and it's been reported.
But they took you seriously, though. I'm looking. That's a silver lining, isn't it? Because a lot of people, I think, historically, you may not have felt that your complaint was being taken seriously.
Of course, I didn't think it was worth even reporting. I thought, there's no way they can find this guy. It's a packed train, but they did take me seriously, and they went through all the CCTV footage. So it was reassuring that you call these numbers and there is somebody at the end of that line who will look into it for you.
Well, the survey was commissioned by British Transport Police, actually, which again speaks to them taking the issue more seriously than perhaps we have done in previous generations.
Yeah.
Did it?
Yeah.
But why do you think you froze? I know that's a slightly stupid question, but you've done role play, presumably, in your training. You've done role play of similar situations.
Yeah. I've done cage fighting, James. I'm
fighting?
so competent. Yeah,
oh.
I'm so competent. I can defend myself against. I'd like to think against anybody, but in that moment when it happens to you, and you have this, and it's sort of like you freeze and you don't really understand what's happened,
right?
Why it's happened, and how it can happen.
Yes.
And it's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre because I've always thought to myself, like, if anything happened to me, I've got my own back. I can do it. I've taught self-defense. But in that moment, I was so shocked that this has just happened to me.
Do you know? I hope and I think that anybody listening to this who looks back on their own unpleasant experiences, their own horrible experiences, and feels a sense of guilt or shame at the fact that they did, I think you've probably just made them feel a lot better, actually, without realising it. Because if someone like you, as an actual cage fighter, I'm so slightly distracted by that. It's just not every day that pops up on the programme. Someone like you has that reaction, then people who are not confident they could take care of themselves in that kind of scenario can feel, I think, probably a bit better about their reaction.
Yeah. I did have one more, just another quick story, if you have time.
I don't really, but go on.
Oh, you don't? Okay. It was just a work-related story.
Yes.
I'm a medical professional, actually.
Right.
And in the workplace, when I wanted to quit my job, I had the two owners of the practice that I worked at, men.
Yes.
Close the door on me, sit directly in front of me, in front of the door, and basically shout at me and tell me, "You're a stupid little girl for trying to leave this job. You're going to amount to nothing in your life if you leave us, and we will try and sue you." And I actually took it further to the association, the governing association for my profession.
It all leaches into the same space, doesn't it? Because that's what Emma described as paternalistic condescension is one form of harassment. But the bottom line is they wouldn't have spoken to a man like that. And there it is. Nadia, thank you. I am quite late, so I do have to crack on, not least because after this junction, Phillips O'Brien will join us, the Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews and author of a rather splendid new book called The Strategists, published tomorrow. But he will be here chiefly to talk us through what is going on in Russia. This as another Russian region declares an emergency as the Ukraine offensive on Russian soil enters the second week. It's 11:49. It is 11:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Expected or unexpected events in Russia as the Ukraine offensive there enters its second week. Another region, the Belgorod region, declaring an emergency. Reports this morning of Putin being compelled to move troops from Ukrainian soil, where they are on the offensive, to Russian soil, where they are now on the defensive. Phillips O'Brien is the Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews, and is also the author of a rather splendid new book, which we shall get on to hopefully before 12 noon. But let's begin with both the significance and, if it's even a word, Phil, the expectedness of these latest chapters in this war.
I think it was certainly unexpected, James, but it was perhaps more unexpected than it should have been because of a lot of the bad reporting of the war that's been happening for the last few months, that people have been overstressing Russian power. They've been making Ukraine look to be in more dire straits than it was. And therefore, what's been happening is that, people, I think, have been underestimating what the Ukrainians can actually do. And what the Ukrainians were doing is very quietly, but very methodically planning this. They planned it really well. They kept it very quiet, and they caught the Russians completely by surprise, and most of the world, I'd have to say.
And what they are doing, for people who possibly are victims of what you've described as the poor reporting, is launching surprise attacks into the Kursk region on the 6th of August and consequently now in control, apparently, of about 74 towns and villages.
Yes, 74. Zelensky said last night they now control 74 places in Russia. We're not quite sure. That could be from a town like Suja. There is a significant sized town. Mostly we're talking about villages. But this is in Russia itself. And this was something that I think people thought the Ukrainians would be very reluctant to do. Certainly, people thought the United States wouldn't want them to do it. But the Ukrainians have decided they now need to take the initiative. And they're going into Russia. And the question is, are they going to stay? And certainly, if you look at Ukrainian government rhetoric, it's leaning towards staying, which I think is surprising to people. I mean, they would give it up eventually,
of course,
but it's not a raid.
These will be counters in a peace negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to run in and run out, or they're going to make the Russians try and drive them out.
Yes.
So originally people said, oh, this is probably just a raid. Ukrainians will run in for a few days, turn around and run out, and then that will be the end of it. This doesn't look like a raid to this point. It looks like they might actually set up an occupied part over the border in Russia and either force the Russians to drive them out or be able to hold part of Russia.
And it puts Putin in well, comical's not quite the right word given the bloody stakes that are in play here, but he has to essentially complain about Ukraine doing in Russia exactly what he has done in Ukraine, with the difference being, of course, that Ukraine have the defense of retaliation.
You could call it tragicomic.
It
is a form of tragic comedy. Yeah, I mean, Putin's in a real bind here because he's a dictator, and dictators need to present strength. It's all about projecting strength. Look at me. And the fact that the Ukrainians can cross the Russian border very easily, they weren't stopped. And from what we can tell, a large number of Russian soldiers have surrendered. That's also not great for Putin. When Russian soldiers are not fighting to defend Russia in the way that he would want, this is all really problematic for him. That's probably why he's going to have to try and throw a lot of forces to drive the Ukrainians out.
And finally, how aware of this will the average Russian be?
We're aware of it now because it's being talked on media.
Right.
It's being presented, I think you could say, less threatening than it is. I mean, it's being presented as this is a problem, but we'll get rid of it and we're going to go on and march on to great victory. So, and that partly puts a lot more pressure on Putin to try and get rid of them soon. So they know of it, but it's being presented, I think, in a particularly minimal way.
Phillips, thank you. As ever, I have a better understanding than I did before you started talking. I think even while we've been on air this morning, that Ukraine's top commander has said 100 Russian prisoners of war have been captured in Kursk. It's a video link in footage posted to the Ukrainian president's Telegram account. We've got, thankfully, a couple of minutes to go rather further back in history, although some of the themes persist. Your new book, The Strategists, essentially, I don't want to turn it into a reality television show, but you're seeking to establish who was the best wartime leader. Who's in contention?
That's the funny thing about the book. The book says there's no one best wartime leader, that it calls Stalin both the worst and the best. And it says Roosevelt's excellent at one thing, but not good at others. Whereas you might say Hitler and Mussolini are pretty bad and they both end up dead because of their war strategy. So that's a pretty good test, of course, that they failed as war leaders, thankfully. But it's more to sort of judge why they make the decisions they make by looking at their past history. All five of these guys had extensive experience.
We should add Churchill to the mix, shouldn't we?
And we should add Churchill as well. I mean, Churchill has the longest experience of war. He goes to war in India long before any of these other fellows end up in war. So they all have great experience of war. The only one who's not a soldier is Roosevelt. All the others actually have combat experience of one type or the other. And they bring all these experiences to the Second World War in a very personal way. And to understand how the war works out, you have to look at their own personal sort of choices.
How commonplace is that approach in the canon, Phil, in history, to actually, because when you describe it like that, it makes perfect sense to look at the motivations through the lens of experience, but it doesn't feel necessarily uber academic in the first instance.
Well, it isn't, and I have to say it's one thing where I think academic studies need to look a little more critically at certain things. Academics often will talk about governments and bureaucracies. But what I found is if you had to write a strategy down in the Second World War, you had no influence. If you actually had to write the damn document, it's because you weren't sitting with Churchill or Hitler or Roosevelt or Stalin and fighting the ideas out. But we tend to overrate the documents. This is one example, and I don't want to bore your listeners, but the United States is said to fight a Germany first strategy. That's the one on paper. At no point do they fight a Germany first strategy. If you go and actually look at what they do, they make very different decisions at different times about where they're going to send equipment and how they're going to fight. So the written strategies of the states don't actually reflect a lot of their strategic choices. And so what this book is trying to say is these are five individuals with very strong ideas, and they're fighting the war the way they want to fight it.
Where did the idea come from?
Well, it actually came from that very boring story I told you about Germany first, because I had, in one of my earlier books, I had written about actually what the Allies made in their equipment and where they sent it. And it was very different than I expected it to be. I expected to find Germany first. But because that's what the U.S. says it is doing. We are fighting a Germany first strategy. But then if you actually look at the data, they're not doing that. And so I thought, well, why are they not doing what they publicly say they should be doing? And I went into the process, and it's basically because Roosevelt and his Joint Chiefs decide they want to fight the war in this very different way personally, as opposed to what they publicly say. And so that's how it all happened. And then if you look at the other leaders, they do the same thing. They have their own very, very personal strategies that they try to impose on their states.
Oh, I got stuck into it last night, and it's a blistering read. I know that the Sunday Times gave you a glowing review as well, and it is published tomorrow.
Comes out in the UK tomorrow, so I'm pretty excited and a little nervous.
Well, good luck with it, and congratulations. The Strategists by Phillips O'Brien, as we say, published tomorrow, and it comes highly recommended by me. Presuming that you keep up the pace, Phil, that you've established in the first 50 or 60 pages.
It peaks out then. You can have a break now.
That's very kind of you. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're staying with academia in the next hour, actually, looking at calls for people doing degrees to choose degrees they're going to really enjoy studying rather than degrees that will necessarily translate into jobs. It plays in a bit with what we discussed yesterday, but it's something I feel surprisingly passionate about, and it flies in the face of what you might describe as late Tory ideology. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. There's a judge who's handing down sentences to some of the rioters who has delivered what I consider to be one of the finest speeches ever delivered from a bench. And I don't let me go home without sharing some of the details with you. I've got a little game for you, actually. Do you think... Well, it's not a game, really. Do you think that Kenny in Liverpool is taking the mickey or not when he texts me to say, "Hi, James, could you please give me Phillips's second name again so I can order his book?" Or do you think that he thinks he must have misheard because Phillips's second name is the same as mine? So, yes, all right, Kenny, O'Brien. It's Phillips O'Brien. Phillips Payson O'Brien, I think, is the name on the front of the cover. No relation at all, as far as I'm aware. But I got that message off Kenny, and I thought, is he teasing me? Is he? I don't think he is he? I think that you probably thought you heard. And he said, well, it can't be O'Brien. Anyway, so no, he does have the same surname as me. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. A quick word on honest Bob Jenrick, who just 10 days after far-right thugs tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers, he has decided to claim that migrants are prioritised for council houses, something that is demonstrably and entirely untrue. I'll read you the relevant legislation in case you are someone who cares, unlike honest Bob Jenrick, someone who cares about such things. New migrants arriving in the UK are not eligible for social housing, except in very limited circumstances. For example, if a spouse is forced to leave home because of domestic violence. Most people who come to the UK on visas to work or study have no recourse to public funds, can't receive benefits and get no help with their housing. In any case, many councils now have local connection rules which favour long-standing residents in their allocations policies rather than newcomers such as migrants. So migrants generally have much less right to a social home than people born in the UK and often have far less chance of getting one even if they eventually become eligible. So do you think somebody who was until recently an immigration minister genuinely ignorant of the rules, or is simply pretending to be ignorant in order to curry favour with the sort of people who were trying to set fire to hotels last week, or who were silently quite supportive of the people trying to set fire to hotels last week? I shall leave you to puzzle that question for the ages. We're going to go a little bit weird now. We're going to have a slightly different conversation than perhaps you're expecting. And it's about, don't laugh, it's about the importance of education, but in a slightly different way. I was surprised to see this story today because it is flying in the face. I was very surprised to see it on the front of the Telegraph because it goes in the different direction from the direction that right-wing media and right-wing politicians have been going in recent years. Their idea, it seems to me, has been that the only reason why you do a degree is to increase your chances of a certain type of job or increase your earning potential. And what the Telegraph has put on its front page today is a call from some quite senior academics for people to do the opposite. Could you tell from my voice that I'd lost the story then? I found it. Everyone relax. I've got it. Everyone relax. Could you tell from my voice that I was casting around for the story that I'm talking about? Could you tell? You can certainly tell if you're watching on the YouTube. The YouTube? You can't call it the YouTube, can you? I've got everything I need. So here's some exclusive content for the YouTubers. So you could see then, couldn't you, that I was struggling to find the story that I was keen to talk about. You could see it, couldn't you? So that's when I went like this to Eleanor. That's our secret code for saying I can't find the article. And if you watch the YouTube, I shouldn't be encouraging too many people to watch the YouTube podcast, which is currently the most popular current affairs podcast on YouTube in the UK. Isn't that incredible when you think of all the publicity and promotion that some people get for their current affairs podcast? We're 4th overall, but the top 3 aren't current affairs, which means as someone who is compelled to do their own marketing, because no one else will do it for me, I can describe myself as the number 1 current affairs podcast in the UK. But of course, I don't necessarily want you to. I mean, you certainly do both, but I don't want to start eating into I don't want to start eating into the highest radar numbers of any talk show on commercial radio in the UK by drawing too much attention to the most popular current affairs podcast in the UK on YouTube. I need to keep both those plates spinning. So, go us. So what you just saw then was silent communication. While the radio listener is getting one version of the programme, you with added visuals. And don't forget to subscribe, by the way. Ring that bell, ding, ding, ding. And turn on notifications. Is that right as well? Yeah, thanks, Hassan. It's all good. You get a slightly different experience. Anyway, I found the story now. It's a very roundabout way of me explaining why, if you're watching the YouTube feed, you just... Thank you, Keith. Thank you very much. You just saw me doing all this malarkey. A-level pupils should choose a degree they enjoy over one based on future earning potential, university chiefs have suggested. Listen, you can kick off straight away by telling me what you think about that suggestion on 0345 6060 973. I think Kieran yesterday, the lad who's trained in musical theatre, currently trying to get as many auditions as possible, he'd be a really good example of someone who's done both. I mean, he's managed to do a degree course that he would really, really enjoy, but also one that is designed to hopefully deliver a career in a field that he wants to be in. And it is performing arts graduates who, sadly, are the most poorly remunerated across all UK universities, with their salaries averaging about 22 grand 5 years after graduating, which is well below the average. But I really like this, and I think that we will be doing everyone a favour, if you like, while encouraging people to maybe make slightly different life decisions. So what I want you to do is talk to me about studying stuff, if you like, studying subjects that don't have an immediate bearing upon your future career, but have improved your life. I think that this is actually a conversation that's worth having. I don't know that 20 years ago I would have done. 14, 15 years ago I would have done. But there's been an assault upon education in recent years. There's been not just an obvious assault when the Deputy Tory Chief Whip wrote to all the Vice-Chancellors in the country asking them to dob in the names of academics who were teaching anything positive about the European Union. You think I'm making that up, don't you? It's true. But also an assault upon the idea, I mean, almost an idea that education isn't for the likes of you. Why are we sending so many people to university? I caught myself falling into this trap a couple of years ago, thinking that, well, maybe these kids shouldn't be going to university. And I tell you who I interviewed once, but Joe Johnson, who I've got no particular beef with. I think he was quite an impressive politician, although taking a peerage off his own brother after leaving the government because he didn't want to serve under his own brother appeared to be quite a conflict of interests. But I remember interviewing him once, and he was describing some new scheme when he was an education minister for people who wouldn't necessarily go to top universities, and he was bigging it up. And I said, would you want your own children to do this scheme? And he looked at me as if I just asked him to go for a swim in a vat full of marmalade. So I hadn't crossed an edge. You can find it on YouTube, I think. You hadn't crossed don't forget to subscribe. You can hadn't crossed his mind. And I don't know, that's a form of conservatism that I'm fascinated by. The idea, well, this won't apply to my children, but I'm here to help others. I mean, it's not unattractive, is it? It's not ugly. It's not like Rees-Mogg type conservatism, which is, well, your children should be sweeping my chimneys, really. It's like your children aren't quite going to have the same academic achievements as my children, so here's some opportunities for that. Yeah, anyway, I digress slightly. Because of the direction of political traffic over the years, I think we've lost sight of the point of education for education's sake. I mentioned my dad to you quite a lot on the programme. You may not have heard me mention that he did a degree with the Open University in his 40s. In fact, a part of the reason my dad did a degree with the Open University in his 40s is to stop me from saying that I'm the first person in my family to have a degree. He beat me to it by about a year or 2 years. It was quite a moment, frankly. It was beautiful. He had his graduation ceremony at the International Convention Centre in Birmingham. My sister was listening to a football game on an earphone in one ear while watching this interminable graduation ceremony, and Manchester United scored, and she literally jumped in the air and shouted, "Yes!" So whoever was getting their degree at the time obviously thought they'd got a massive fan somewhere in the auditorium, when in fact it was my sister celebrating a Manchester United goal. But Dad did a degree. And I thought of this while I was talking to Phillips a moment ago about his book, The Strategist. My dad would have loved that book. A book about Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, Hitler and Mussolini, looking at elements of their personality, elements of their past that may have contributed to their tactical decisions during the Second World War. That had my dad written all over it. And he did a degree, because you can with the Open University, that covered so many different disciplines. He got into Renaissance art, none of which was going to help him as a journalist, materially improve his abilities as a journalist. None of it remotely relevant to his abilities as a journalist, but so enriching and so uplifting that I thought today we would spend some time endorsing the words of Ms. Saxton and Ms. Stern. That's Joe Saxton and Vivian Stern, the chief executives of UCAS and Universities UK, when they say that really pupils should be choosing degrees they enjoy rather than ones based on future earning potential. Now, it may be that you think this is a middle-class luxury that your kids can't afford, because if they're going to be running up the kind of debts you run up now to get a degree, then they've got to have at least one eye, and quite possibly two, upon future earning potential. And that is welcome as well. That's part of the conversation as well. But how did your field of study enrich your life without enriching you? I love questions like this. I hope that you share my enthusiasm. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you like. I mean, simply having a degree statistically enhances your earning potential, but it's clearing tomorrow, isn't it? The A-level results come out tomorrow, and more kids than ever before are going to pile online looking to fit their qualifications to a course. I think I read somewhere else that more 18-year-olds than ever before are prioritising clearing. They are actually really, they haven't made their decisions already, and then they're hoping to get the results they need to do what they want to do. They're waiting until they get the results to look at what doors that opens for them, and then they're going to make their decisions accordingly. So as an entirely new cohort of 18-year-olds, including mine, get their A-level results tomorrow, how do you have a conversation with them? What do you say to them? If they turn around to you and say, I'm going to do a degree in X, Y, and Z because it will increase and earning, and you say, no, you can worry about that for the rest of your life. You're spending 3 years at university. Fill your boots with enriching education, stuff that speaks to the soul, stuff that speaks to the spirit, to the mind, to the inner life that you will be leading for decades hence. Don't do a degree that speaks to the bank balance, to the job description, to the employment prospects. How does that sound to you? And how do your experiences play in to this plea from university chiefs that 18-year-olds making their decisions tomorrow prioritise passion over prospects? 0345 6060 973. 19 minutes after 12 is the time. Let's go to Sheffield first. Edmund is there. Edmund, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Nice to speak to you. First time caller. I'm a little bit nervous.
You're very welcome. Who were you named for? Who were you named for, Edmund? Do you know?
Edmund Hillary.
Oh, fantastic.
It's joint first man up Everest.
Yes, exactly that. That's great.
Yeah.
What made you pick up the phone?
It resonated with me a lot, what you were saying, particularly in terms of, pushing people into further education for the sense of enjoyment and what they want to pursue maybe as a passion and not necessarily as a career. So for as long as I can remember, I've always had an interest in kind of natural history and wildlife, and a particular kind of hobby of mine was bird watching. So, I was quite the cool kid at school.
You see, you're being sarcastic, but I think that is cool. What's the rarest bird you've seen?
The rarest bird? Oh, it's a good question. I've seen a mangrove finch in the Galapagos Islands. Is probably up there.
God. All right, you win.
So as long as I can remember, this has been something that has interested me, and I had previous thoughts of going into the military or doing jobs in sort of design and technology and all those things. But I sort of continued with this pursuit of kind of natural history and went on to study zoology at university as an undergraduate degree. Knowing kind of full well that job prospects beyond these sort of degrees aren't particularly great in terms of
so
their
were you thinking
potential.
I might still go into the army, but if I'm going to spend 3 years at university, I'm going to spend it doing stuff that I find absolutely fascinating?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. I mean, you got strange looks from army careers people who would say, well, why do you want to fly a helicopter if you've learnt about, birds and worms and things like that? But I it was always something that I sort of wanted to go into and go and do. And I did it, and it was the best decision I ever made. And then I went on to study evolutionary biology as a master's degree. And now I'm actually currently a professional bird watcher. I'm an ornithologist for.
So it has turned into a job.
It has, but
that's not the point of your call.
Yeah, I guess to a point. I earn money. I get by. I could always earn more money.
How can you be a professional bird watcher? Just talk me through it, will you? I just out of interest.
So I currently work for. I'll keep the company name and stuff nameless, for obvious sake. But I currently work for like an environmental consultancy firm.
Right.
So we bid on tenders for proposed wind farms, solar farms, housing developments, all those sort of things, large projects and large developments across the country.
Yeah.
And
are you looking for reasons? You're looking for reasons to curtail the development by finding rare birds?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Or also advising mitigation strategies or proposing kind of alternative routes or developments, or trying to advise, for housing developments, this is what you should implement into your development.
So what do you do? Just drive to a potential site with your binoculars and sit there all day looking for things?
Pretty much. I've actually been on one this morning. And I was just driving back, so I.
What did you see? Did you catch anything?
I had a hobby on site.
Really?
Potentially nesting. Yeah.
Oh, that could be problematic for developers, could it?
It is. It's a Schedule 1 species, so it's one of the most highly protected bird species in the UK.
And you got it.
Yeah, we got potential nesting. We technically, because we can't disturb if they are nesting. You kind of can't go near them unless you have a license. But I think sort of going back to the issue of pursuing education for the sense of enjoyment and I guess a passion. There are times where I look back on my degrees and go, well, if I'd have done X, Y, Z, I could be earning quite considerably more.
Like what? What sort of degrees would immediately translate into higher earning? Because I think of the sort of graduate trainee program, and you could go down various routes regardless of what your degree was.
This is true. I don't know. I think you shouldn't compare yourself to others, but I know friends from school and things who've gone on to done mathematics, business, IT sort of things, computer science. They seem to be doing all right for themselves.
But mate, you've just seen a hobby.
Yeah, I know.
In the wild, and got paid.
It's not too bad.
Hashtag winning. I love that. Thank you, Edmund. This will make you laugh. No. Jackie's listening, and she heard you describe yourself as a professional bird watcher. She says, I just tuned in, and I thought he said he was a professional burglar. That's just a sideline, right?
Yeah, that's the side hustle. Yeah, that pays the extra bills. Yeah.
Take care, Edmund. The reason I asked, if you think it was an odd question to ask, who he was named for, is I'm a bit obsessed with Edmund out of King Lear. And you would not name your son after Edmund in King Lear because he was a right nasty so-and-so. But I don't know why that question popped into my mind. But it was a good job I asked because it was a beautiful answer, wasn't it, Edmund Hillary? Siobhan's in Gravesend. Siobhan, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
nice
Siobhan.
to speak to you again.
Likewise.
Oh, God, this really excites me. Really, really excites me. So this is personal to me and to my children.
Right.
So I'm 50.
No, never.
I am. I feel every year of it. Sometimes. And I left school after my A-levels. I went to grammar school. I'm intelligent. I'm apparently quite high-functioning intelligence.
Yes.
And unfortunately, because of circumstances, I didn't go to university. I wanted to do law.
Right.
I had to go to work as a carer because of circumstances, which is the career I developed, became a manager. And when my children all left home, I thought, right, I'm going to do something that I enjoy, and I'm doing arts and humanities. So I've covered subjects from the philosopher Schopenhauer to Mozart to, Ireland during the Revolution, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And this is what I want to broadcast, because people who speak like me don't often get looked at as being someone intelligent, but I got 87% in my first year.
Go, get in. Get in. That's a first all day long.
Well, 70% plus is a first.
Oh, look,
I'm
look at
delighted.
that then. There should be something above a first plus just for you.
Exactly. I mean, I can't tell you how much joy this fills me with. And with my children, I always said to them, what I want from you is
money. Money.
You're and care when I get older. Wipe my bum when I get older.
All right.
I want you to be happy, healthy, kind.
Yes.
And tolerant,
yes.
and just do what makes you happy. So my son did a physics degree,
and now he's a Reform MP.
And oh God, please don't. We wouldn't be.
No, I so go on. What did he do?
Well, he now works. I tried to ring you last week actually because he works with international students at the Midlands University.
Right.
And he's just taken voluntary redundancy because they're on the verge of bankruptcy.
Because people aren't coming because of our successful immigration policies, discouraging people from coming here to learn stuff.
Yes. And I don't think people realise, just quickly, going on to something else, these students have to have, or their parents have to have, bank accounts with ridiculous sums in £40,000-50,000, depending on what they're doing. For medicine, that's much more.
Yeah.
So none of them are getting loans. Anyway, my daughter's just finished, as you were saying, performing arts. She's just finished a post-production editing degree. And now she's looking for a job in marketing. She lives in Streatham, works in a pub, and she's quite happy.
Good.
But the thing is, I think with university, it teaches them some integrity, some self-discipline.
Hopefully.
It often picks them up and puts them in a place, where they'll meet new people, broaden their horizons, learn how to pay bills, learn how to cook for themselves. And all of those, I think, are transferable skills.
I agree with you. And actually, it's a new dimension to what these two university chiefs have said, because they're saying follow your passion, not your prospects. But you're reminding us that there are many, many things you'll pick up that are not related to the exams that you'll sit, but which are definitely part of what we could loosely describe as life lessons.
Absolutely.
What I want you to do...
Absolutely.
What I want you to do is explain what it gives you when you're doing you're learning about Schopenhauer or you're learning about Mozart. What does it feed that doesn't get fed? What refreshes the parts that other experiences cannot reach?
It gives me some sort of creative license. I feel very passionate about social subjects and things like that, and that often comes into my essay writing. So with Ireland, I brought in comparisons with the suffragist movement.
Right.
I got really good grade for that paper, and it gives me a voice. Really gives me a voice, and I know I can ring people like you up and listen to you all day long, James. And but it's really great to put that on paper and see the result, and then get the feedback I get, and also get a little bit of critique.
Yes, of course.
You could do this better, and I just feel like I'm just releasing something that, although I very rewarding working in care, and I went very far.
I understand.
But it is draining, morning, noon, and night. Yeah,
you're feeding something different here. You're feeding your soul in a different way. Parts that go on.
I couldn't wait to get on the radio and say I got 87.
I know. I did notice that. How much? What was it again? How much was it again?
87. Honestly,
that's extraordinary. It really is. And I think listening to you almost make me feel that you think it's almost as if you're more engaged with the world around you, that these studies give you almost like tentacles reaching into parts you hadn't previously visited.
I couldn't have written this stuff when I was 18.
No.
What did I know when I was 18?
Yeah.
I was more interested in raving and seeing my friends and,
Well, I was very blessed. I did both. I did the raving and the university, but I would benefit a lot more now from doing some of the stuff that I just skived or blagged. That now Schopenhauer being a wonderful example, actually. Now I would be absolutely up to my neck in it, and the idea of having the space and the time. And I used to think that was an age thing. Siobhan, like me, thinks that the difference between doing it in your 50s and doing it in your teens is huge. But what this advice is designed to do is to speak to the teenagers who will really relish and benefit from that wonderful 3-year window in your life where you can think about things other than the rat race and material gains and the jobs market. I think, there's a balance to be struck. But I do feel we've probably gone too far in the other direction, and that these two academics, the chief executives of UCAS and Universities UK, Vivian Stern and Joe Saxton, are onto something here. The aim, they say, is for students to gain a place on the course that they are passionate about. You can reassess your choices during clearing. Once you know your results, you can find a course that really matches your aspirations and strengths. It's lovely, that. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. It's 12:34. I'm going to take a moment to do this, but I will be with you shortly. Lots of people are answering the question about the difference between passion and prospects, prioritising passion instead of prospects when it comes to deciding what to study. You know, when racists pretend that they're not racist and they are just concerned about taxpayers' money being spent on housing people in hotels and that kind of thing. You've heard that kind of rhetoric an awful lot. It's almost always ignorant, sometimes deliberately ignorant, willfully ignorant rather, and sometimes not willfully ignorant. If Farage says that they're being housed in 4-star hotels and they might all be ISIS, that's very willful. That's a very deliberate invitation to people to get very, very angry and, of course, potentially to act upon that anger. That's why the description of the Farage riots was trending on Twitter for days over the last couple of weeks. But the taxpayer one is a good one as well, because it allows you to cast yourself as a sort of virtuous actor in this space, which is why a judge called Robert Linford played such a blinder when sentencing a rioter in Plymouth the other day. He sort of rounded on a criminal called Cann, C-A-N-N, and examined some of the claims that he had made during his police interviews. He was seen, John Cann was seen on police video footage on his mobility bike on the north side of Royal Parade, I think, in Plymouth, bending down, picking up an item, throwing it at the counter-protesters. He then picked up a firework and hurled it just before it went off. He was caught up in, not caught up, he was an enthusiastic contributor to the violence. But what I liked about this sentencing was the detail. So Judge Robert Linford said to him that during your police interview, you told the police that you were concerned about, and I quote, the better use of taxpayers' money and why people were having to pay to keep these people in this country after committing such heinous crimes. Which doesn't make perfect sense, but you know that he's very much of that kind of, I pay my taxes and why is it going on hotel bills for these people? So the judge then said to him, and I'm going to read the entire paragraph. He said, so let's look. Can I do a judge's voice for this? He probably does. He's probably got a Birmingham accent or something, but I'm going to try. Should I do a judge's voice? So let's look at how the taxpayer have been funding your activities over the last 38 years. Let's see what you've cost the country. This, remember, is to one of the patriotic rioters.
Passing notes in class, secret smiles, lost in each other for miles and miles. First crushes blooming like flowers in May. In the innocence of love, we found our way. Innocent love, pure and true, like the morning dew shining anew. Hearts entwined in a tender dance. Innocent love, our sweet romance. In a schoolyard where dreams take flight, we found love in the morning light.
You've got 10 aliases, 4 fictitious birth dates, you're 51 years of age, you've been convicted of 170 offences, you've been convicted of theft, arson, taking cars, handling stolen goods, obtaining by deception, burglary, dangerous driving and possessing bladed articles. In all, over the years that you've been visiting the criminal justice system, you've received sentences totalling 357 months in prison, many of them concurrent. In other words, nearly 30 years. That, Mr. Cann, is what you've been costing this country, and you sit there in that interview and saw fit to be critical of others. You have no right whatever to say who should or should not be in this country. And I love that detail because it, I suspect, applies to an awful lot of people who cloak themselves in bogus claims about concerns about taxation while being enormous drains and carbuncles upon polite society. I mean, that's such a long charge sheet. It almost makes the repeat offender Stephen Yaxley Lennon look like an amateur, doesn't it? But goodness me, you should refresh your memories regularly on exactly what crimes that character has been convicted of over the years. It's quite extraordinary. But another patriotic defender of British values or defender of the British taxpayer. Back to studying things because you love them rather than because they'll make you rich. So you enrich yourself. Enriching rather than enrichment, if you like. Lizzie's in Uxbridge. Lizzie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
I just wanted to say that I've recently turned 50 and I've recently started a mathematics degree.
Gosh.
For the sheer joy of it. And I'm absolutely loving it. Wish I'd done it sooner. So I studied originally law and before that I did a degree in microbiology. So I've got a few other degrees and a few other different things. And I just
Did you turn either of those into a career?
So I turned microbiology into a career for about a month and worked as a microbiologist for about a month. And I realised was sort of and I hate to say an undergraduate degree in a lab. I was never going to progress. Certainly,
you needed master's, probably PhD even.
Yeah, exactly. You needed a research degree to work as a researcher. So I thought, well, I'll go back to university. And I thought, well, given I've got a degree in microbiology, I'll do a master's in microbiology. And then I thought, well, that's kind of more the same. Why don't I do a degree in engineering and chemical engineering? And then I thought, well, that's kind of more of the same of microbiology and biochemistry that I studied. So I thought, why don't I do something completely different? So I did law. So I must be the only person that sort of accidentally became a barrister and solicitor. So I did my law degree and then I qualified in New Zealand and I worked as a barrister and solicitor in New Zealand, sort of, as I say, accidentally.
Did you enjoy it?
And then I came up, I loved it. Good. Absolutely loved it. I used my microbiology degree once working as a lawyer, and that was because someone needed to spell toxoplasmosis in an affidavit, and that was it.
Yes.
That was the only time I ever used my microbiology degree as a lawyer.
I mean, you could have used a dictionary.
Well, it wasn't me. It was one of my co-workers.
Yes,
but fair point. And I finished a master's degree last year in management, and I thought, what should I do now? So I thought I'd take on do a law degree, and there are a couple of reasons behind that. One is I just love learning, and arguably I'm not going to use the mathematics degree at all in my day job. I don't use the microbiology degree at all in my day job.
You're just loving it.
Just loving it. But my father died with dementia.
I'm sorry.
And there is evidence to show that people who the longer you study, the more you delay any potential onset of dementia. So that is one of the reasons. Another reason is, like, my husband is very much, loves to do triathlons, loves to do, ultramarathons. Will happily do an ultramarathon that's a 100-kilometre run, that kind of thing. So he pushes himself physically, whereas I feel like I push myself mentally. So we still get the, some kind of sense of achievement out of, trying to achieve new things, but we just do it in a slightly different way.
I like that. Can you put it into words? What do you get out of your mathematical studies that you don't get from any other areas of life?
Well, it is a sense of achievement.
Yeah.
That is something, but it's also I'm curious about the world, and I'm learning about new things, and I'm learning about a new way to approach things, and I'm learning a new way to a new understanding. I feel like I've got a better understanding of the world because of studying a variety of different things. One of the things I said to your producer before I came on the call was, bless him, my father had many good traits, but he was also, I'll be honest, a bit racist.
Okay.
And I grew up in New Zealand.
This has taken a turn.
Well, I grew up in New Zealand, and he was very much of the attitude that Māori were lazy, that they were dole bludgers, this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And also he felt that, solo mums shouldn't get benefits, and if they choose to have children, they should. I remember one of his friends saying, well, they should all line up at soup kitchens. And it wasn't really until I studied my law degree that I had a better understanding of the nuances around the how the Māori had been treated in New Zealand and how the government had mistreated them over many years. And those were things that I hadn't been exposed to growing up, because that wasn't the narrative in the household.
Gosh.
And then going into tertiary education, I'm like, hang on, I now completely see the world in a different way because I've been exposed to different ways of thinking.
Well, that's education in a nutshell, isn't it? Leading out of where you were previously and leading you to new places. It's also why fascists hate the arts quite often, because you learn empathy as well, of course, from... Yes. I know you're a mathematician, but the humanities teach empathy as well, because, you read a book about someone whose experiences are nothing like yours, and you hone the ability to imagine what it's like to live a life that's nothing like yours. And as soon as you do that, you become less likely to set fire to hotels containing asylum seekers. Lizzie, I'm cracking on only because the time is ahead of us, and I know that the next caller who will join us after this junction works in a field that Charlie will be delighted about, because Charlie just texted to say, unfortunately, this call-in is really only aimed at a very small percentage of society who can afford to go back to education. I'd absolutely love to learn more, but I can't afford it. And I think that Tom in Chichester works for a charity that helps people in precisely the position you described, Charlie. So we'll hear from him after this. It is 12:47. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation is about prioritising your passion over your prospects. And this is something that many 18-year-olds will be facing tomorrow, although it is oddly a conversation that's veered into the other end, or a little bit further down the age scale as well. People perhaps better placed with a few more years on the block to describe the difference between studying for the joy of study and studying as a means to a material end. Tom is in Chichester. Tom, what can you tell us?
Well, what was fascinating, James, is you kind of repeated the idiom that, find something that you're passionate about, and that's been reeled out for years and years, and then you'll never kind of work a day in your life. And what it's shifting to with particularly lower income students is find something you can be really good at and then become passionate at it, particularly if it leads to an outcome or a technical credential, because that's what employers need now, because there's no more of the kind of on-the-job training that perhaps there used to be.
So what is it you do? You work in the field, I think.
Yeah, so I set up a charity and foundation about 15 years ago, and we fund low-income students from underrepresented backgrounds to go to universities. That might be white working-class boys or first-gen immigrants to the UK, particularly at master's level, who want to go into STEM, and often they didn't get a chance to either because they came from another country where that credential is not recognised, or they perhaps fell into the trap of doing something they were passionate about, realising that perhaps the employment market isn't there for those skills, and therefore then had to go and do a master's in something that gave them a credential. That might be an accountancy qualification, cybersecurity, or software engineering.
So, I mean, there is obviously a balance to be struck, isn't there, between prospects and passion. But if you are prioritising prospects to the exclusion of passion, you're going to have a pretty miserable experience at university, I think.
Well, I think that's it. And I think we conflate education and university at the two. But what's interesting about, I think, the article you referenced earlier is we also remember that universities are a business, and therefore they're trying to now promote courses that cost them less to deliver. So the really expensive courses for them to deliver are engineering and maths and sciences. And so what they need to do is fill their kind of quotas with lower cost courses to deliver, because the government hasn't increased the amount that universities get for each student for the last 10 years. And so they're under huge financial pressure. And I think we'll see probably 10 to 20 universities going bust in the next 24 months unless there's something that happens.
We've already heard from people taking redundancy and warnings from people in the business of signing up international students. The riots haven't helped. Even before the riots happened, of course, the policies put in place designed literally to deter foreign students from coming here, and the money that they bring is the money that pays for...
Probably one of the greatest strengths of the UK economy, and one of the greatest strengths to the diversity of thinking at universities. It's not even just kind of old school United Colours of Benetton diversity, actually the diversity of thinking. particularly now, most students go for the power of the network as well. The people they meet there from international countries give them a LinkedIn environment, give them people they'll work with or potentially get referred into to get hired. Remember, we realised that most employers use universities as a screening mechanism. So perhaps when your listeners are looking at this, rather than looking at perhaps doing something, if they want to do something they're really passionate about, get the highest tariff university you can do to do that, because an employer will look at your institution before they look at your subject if it's not a technical one.
There it is. That was the point I was trying to convey without having the lingo or the understanding to convey it. So it's a bit of a misrepresentation to young people. To overlook the fact that the caliber, if you like, or the status, the rating of the university is going to be in many ways more important than what you studied for the kind of jobs where a degree is a requirement, but what the degree is in doesn't matter that much. Do you want to mention the charity, Tom? You don't.
We're called EdAid, but I think you just hit on a really magic point there. That your colleague earlier did ornithology. If you did archaeology at Oxford, you would get a job at Goldman Sachs over someone that did mathematics at a different university. And I won't mention that.
No, of course.
But Oxford doing anything will triumph a deeply technical subject at a different university. Yeah. And so I think students need to look at balancing what they care about and what they're passionate about and what they can get employed in, realizing that lower income students these days tend to go towards they don't have the academic enlightenment in mind. They tend to move towards the programs around engineering or ones that will lead to a job upon graduation.
What was the charity called again?
EdAid, EDAID.
Excellent. Tom, thank you. 12:52 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What would you do now if you can have your time again? Have you been through it, didn't go to university, did go to university, but you're an adult now and you could do it all again? What would you study? Because that feeling there is what these university chiefs are trying to remind 18-year-olds of tomorrow. That idea that, and I don't know if you know at 18, do you know one of the main problems we have? I nearly said as a species then, but even by my standards that would be quite pompous. Is I think we all imagine, when I say 18-year-olds, we all imagine ourselves when we were 18 and think that is representative of 18-year-olds. It's just nonsense. There were people at my university who I realise now loved it. They loved studying for studying's sake. International relations was a very popular course at my university. I'm still not quite sure what it was, but an awful lot of people on that course were fully engaged for 3 years. It was all they wanted to do, was study, read, write, talk. For me, for someone in my class and background, university was a prerequisite, a presumption. You would just go. And the course that I did was absolutely fascinating, but I was a bit of an idiot at 19 by the time I got there, distracted by all the things that 19-year-olds throughout history have been distracted by. But now, to have an uninterrupted relationship with my books and to be comfortable, to have a roof over my head and food in my belly, the appeal of that to me at this age is absolutely incomparable to what it was when I was 19. But it's a stupid analysis because there's loads of 18 and 19-year-olds who would benefit enormously from precisely this kind of education and prioritising passion over prospects. And sadly, I bet inevitably, as Tom's just reminded us, looking at the institution as the thing that will most impress a potential employer rather than necessarily the course. You might as well do the thing that you love. Mark is in Halton Heath in Dorset. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hello, yes. When I was 68, I'm now 2 days off 75, I really felt I'd profit from doing a master's. And my first degree in theology was pretty abysmal, but I got a very good result in the master's. But the whole point is that I learned so much which backed up the way I'd been thinking over the years. And I particularly benefited from reading René Girard, if you've heard of him.
Oh, I haven't, no.
Oh, absolute must, for, not just for theology, but for literature, for anthropology and so on. He was a polymath, and he just studied the human race and how right from the very beginning, mimesis, wanting to copy others, meant that not only did they do that, but when it didn't work, they would blame people, scapegoat people for being the cause of their failure. And so right from the earliest societies, there would be sacrifice initiated. And eventually that became animal sacrifice in the Old Testament. But it's an absolute fascinating, I wish I could send you my dissertation, but absolute fascinating study, and it's helped me ever so much with the
understanding the world around you.
Preaching and doing thoughts for the day and writing journal articles and so on to counteract exactly in the way that you do the idiotic tropes that come out from people.
Well, it is. I mean, I'm talking about idiotic tropes. I hope this is a non-idiotic trope, but knowledge is power, and the power you describe to undo prejudice or to unpick propaganda is probably one that, oddly, is still undervalued at this stage in our society cycles, as we've seen in recent days, in recent weeks. The power that people have to provoke violence, to provoke hatred, to provoke riots is sometimes it feels unchecked, particularly in the age of social media. So oddly, that little thing I read out earlier proves Mark's point perfectly, although it's not particularly highfalutin, but it is not hard to find out, even as honest Bob Jenrick seeks to rabble-rouse with regard to the idea that access to social housing is easier or greater for recent arrivals in this country. The evidence that it isn't is both powerful and easy to find, but you've got to want to look for it, and that, I guess, is the kind of thing you learn. It's gone a bit weird, this one. Thank you, Mark, and happy birthday for 2 days' time. But I looked at it wrong. Of course this conversation was going to be with older people, even though it's about younger people, because how's any 18-year-old going to ring me and tell me about the joys of doing a degree in a subject that they're passionate about instead of one that is likely to enhance their prospects? So it takes me by surprise sometimes, this programme, but that shouldn't really have taken me by surprise. I should have seen that coming a mile off. Last word to Ange, who's in Great Torrington. I've only got a minute, Ange, so make it sing.
Okay. Hello. Thank you, James, for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Mine's a fairly simple story, really. I was probably I was the first person in our family to go to university. I took a fairly ordinary job at 18 because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and then decided it wasn't terribly creative, and I'd always enjoyed drawing. Only got one A level in art, so I went and did a foundation in art, then went on to do a degree in design, converted that with a PGCE, and ended up teaching design and technology up to A level for 15 years, and thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. Especially as a mature student, I think that made the experience even greater.
There's no downside. There's no downside to it.
None whatsoever. None whatsoever.
You can't know too much. You can't understand too much or know too. I warned you we only had a minute, and I've only got the first half of your story, but I'll get the second half next time we return to territory a little bit like this. And also, it's very important that I just remind you what Siobhan got in her recent first year of her new degree. She got 87%. Can we put that in the news bulletin, please? Is that no? Okay. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. Download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now, standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's Matthew Wright. 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 Fogarty, it's Matthew Wright.